Are you tired of spending too much of your hard-earned money at the supermarket? Are you dreaming of farm fresh eggs, homegrown veggies, and homemade everything? Well, welcome to Ditch the Store, where we break free from supermarket dependence and take back control of our food and household essentials. I'm CJ, and I'm here to show you that life is too short for store-bought eggs. So let's get started. G'day everyone, and welcome to episode 114 of Ditch the Store. We are talking sourdough this week, and I will preface everything by saying excuse me for my coughing. I will try and pause whenever I go to cough. I had the dreaded flu that has been going around Australia, and as you can hear from my voice, I'm very croaky still. Unfortunately, after a week of the flu, I was not getting any better. And without throwing any conspiracy theories in there, since COVID, I have had several bouts of pneumonia. And as soon as the flu kind of passed and it didn't get any better, I kind of knew. And I pushed through for a couple of days. I probably shouldn't have pushed through for a couple of days. By the time I went to our local hospital, because it was a Sunday and I was in absolute agony, by the time I went to the hospital, they said that I had actually developed pleurisy, which is the second time I've had that since COVID. So not fun. Lots of steroids. I'm on my last day of steroids today, so I'm hoping that my voice is starting to come back and I'm starting to get a bit more of a breath back in. But if I go to cough, there may be, if you notice little pauses in the recording, apologies, but I'm sure you don't want me coughing in your ear. So we will push through and see how we go, hopefully without too many interruptions. We are talking all things sourdough for the next 8 weeks, roughly. We're going to be talking about sourdough. Now, that probably strikes some people as a bit odd who've been listening for a while, because I have been on a predominantly carnivore, ketovore diet for on and off for probably 18 months. So the fact that I'm making bread probably makes some people a little bit like, well, hang on a sec, don't you not eat bread? I bounce backwards and forwards with my diet. I don't necessarily stick. I'm definitely not a strict carnivore. When I feel that my health is deteriorating, I do tend to go towards carnivore for a couple of weeks to try and boost my health back up again. I'd probably be better off if I stuck with carnivore, to be honest, but I love my food and I like variety. So it's never going to work for me to only have a very strict one food style diet. But ketovore I do tend to stick more with, so I try to avoid grains. Now, sourdough obviously is grains. So what am I doing making sourdough? Well, the rest of my family don't have to avoid grains. And so as a result, I do make sourdough bread. That being said, I still eat some sourdough bread from time to time. And I'll discuss it a bit further down. But for those of you that have, and obviously, disclaimer here, if you are celiac, this does not apply to you. Follow your doctor's advice if you're celiac. But if you are somebody who is gluten sensitive, a little bit gluten intolerant, which is what I have been for most of my adult life, what I discovered was homemade sourdough, proper sourdough. So not the sourdough that you see marked in the shops as sourdough, and then you flip it over and the list of ingredients is a mile long and you can't pronounce half of them. Not that kind of sourdough, because that is not really sourdough. That is commercially baked bread that they call sourdough because they've added things to it to make it taste like sourdough, because sourdough does have a very distinct taste to it. So not that kind of sourdough. We're talking genuine sourdough, which is made from flour, salt, and water. And that's it. That's the only ingredients. That type of sourdough, when I eat that in moderation, so I can't go crazy, I can't eat a whole loaf, but if I eat it in moderation, what I've found is that my gluten intolerance is next to none. I have no stomach issues from sourdough. Now, I've done a little bit of research, and we'll talk about it in a minute. I have done a little bit of research into why that happens, because it interests me that, commercial bread, I ate 2 slices of commercial bread and I'm in agony all day. My stomach just hurts and my skin gets itchy and all kinds of horrible, like, autoimmune type symptoms. But when I have sourdough, kind of different. Anyway, I do follow a guy over in the US who I'm desperate to go and visit. He does workshops in his restaurant, and his restaurant is called Modern Stone Age Kitchen. He was an archaeologist who became a chef through his love of archaeology and all things old that humans ate. and he has tried to modernize ancient diets to make them work in the modern day, but because they never caused us grief back then. They were diets that worked for us. Same as the carnivore diet has worked for us, in that it's if you eat what humans were intended to eat and not all the processed, especially ultra processed crap that we have available to us at the supermarkets, we don't have the same health issues. People that stick to those diets don't have the same health issues. They can stand there and say there's no proven evidence. And I did try and get evidence about the gluten intolerance thing with sourdough. There is actually no documented evidence to show that sourdough doesn't impact gluten intolerant people. But everybody that I speak to who has any kind of gluten sensitivity comments that certain styles of wheat, so particularly wheats from European countries, and sourdough breads and sourdough pastas and sourdough baguettes and sourdough pizza crusts don't affect them in the same way that commercially made bread does. So let's get into it. So what's the deal with sourdough? For those that are completely new, if you're not completely new, bear with me. It won't take a minute to describe, but I'm just going to run through it. And I have written it down in teenage year description for people that really, because it's easier for me to explain if I can do it in the most simple terms. So it is a science experiment. You mix sourdough is sourdough starter. So bread that is made from sourdough is made from flour, water, salt, and a sourdough starter. Now the sourdough starter is a supplement for yeast. In modern breads, we use baker's yeast, but in old days, we had different kinds of yeast that we used. But the traditional and first style of bread that was made using sourdough yeast. Now, the sourdough yeast is made from mixing flour and water and leaving it to sit and ferment. And to do that, you essentially get flour and water, put in a jar, leave it for 24 hours, take half of it out, add the same amount of weight, and there are different schools of thought on the ratios, but we'll keep it simple and say 1 for 1 for 1. So 1 portion of sourdough starter that's left over from your first batch, 1 portion of flour, 1 portion of water, mix it all together again, leave it for another 24 hours. And what happens is when you mix the flour and water but allow air to get into it, so you don't want it completely sealed, you want air to be able to circulate around it, friendly bacteria. People always think bacteria is horrible, but there are good bacteria that we need to survive. Bacteria that are in the soil. So there's bacteria in the air. And that air, bacteria, and also bacteria that would be found on your hands, because you can wash them as much as you like, but they're never going to be perfectly clean. That mixes with the flour and the water and it ferments. And nature turns the flour and water into a form of yeast through the fermentation process. Now, those little microbes that are all in there now from the bacteria, they feed on the flour and water that's being mixed together. And it breaks down, it releases gases, it gets very bubbly. Sourdough mother starter is very bubbly mix, and it can be very light and stretchy and stringy and that kind of thing, because there's gas trapped in between and it makes it rise. So you'll hear people talk about having mixing their mother and allowing it to rise and start to drop before they use it for their bread. And you want it to get that really active, that's what they call it, active formation of bubbles happening in it. When that happens, that's it fermenting. And that's what you want. Now, heat will make it happen quicker. Cold will restrict it, so you can slow it down by putting it in the fridge. But if you want it to ferment so that you can use it for bread making, you leave it somewhere nice and warm where it will come up. You don't want to leave it in sun. We don't want to cook it. We just want to make it a nice room temperature kind of thing in a good, nice room. So while that bacteria is doing that thing, it also develops texture and flavour that is then mixed in with the flour and water that you mix it with to make a loaf of bread. And that texture and flavour it can be quite a sweet and tangy kind of taste. It can be sour when it's baked into bread. If it gets acidic, if it smells like, I always think like nail polish, then it's going off. It's going too far. And you don't want it to go to that point. So if it ever smells like it's that real, I want to say acrid, they call it. It's a real nail polish remover smell. If it gets to that point, you need to refresh it. So to refresh it, cut it in half and feed it with And that's what they call it, feed it. When you add flour and water to it, you're feeding your mother dose, your mother. So you feed the mother and it activates it again and makes it healthy. Now, if it's been left to go a long way, and I have been guilty, I think everybody that's ever dabbled in sourdough has been guilty of leaving their sourdough on a hot bench too long or in the back of the fridge and forgetting about it. Sometimes you have to feed it over the space of several days to get it to get back up to active status. And the older the sourdough mother is, because you can keep sourdough mother going for a long time, the older the sourdough mother is, the better, the stronger it becomes, and it activates again much quicker each time. So you can be quite. I've got to be honest. I'm pretty mean to my poor old sourdough. For those watching on YouTube, I've got him. It's a mother, but I call it a boy's name. I call it Harry because Harry's just a little bit fluffy, and I like Harry a bit fluffy. So that's, and you probably can't see it there. My camera's nowhere near good enough. But I've just made a loaf of bread, and you can see in there that it's a bit bubbly and a bit soft and light and fluffy, and it was nowhere near that size when I put it in the jar. That's it bubbled up, going to the height that it should be. So that bacteria makes a yeast. So instead of having to use baker's yeast, you are using you're using the things that are in the bread already and the natural microbes that are in the air and the fermentation process to make a natural form of yeast, which means you don't have to go to the store and buy baker's yeast. Yay, we get to ditch the store again. So that's one less thing that you have to worry about from the store. So making sourdough bread means you never have to buy baker's yeast ever again. Now, that being said, I'll put my hand up. I have got baker's yeast in the fridge. To be honest, it's probably past its use by date because I make sourdough pizza dough. I make sourdough bread. I've just started dabbling in sourdough cookies, or crackers, I should say, for the kids. And I have also going to have a go at sourdough pasta, fresh pasta. So my poor old baker's yeast that's in the fridge is probably going to expire before it gets used because there's still probably half a jar in there, and there's probably been half a jar in there for the last 2 years. My Harry that I have here on the desk, Harry is about 2 years old now. Now, I did have one when we lived at Gunning, when we were on the first farm. I had a sourdough starter there. And before we moved, I had health issues I was trying the ketovore stuff and I'd gone off the grains completely because it was just not working for me. And I actually threw my sourdough starter out, which now in hindsight I wish I hadn't, because that would be a 6-year-old sourdough and a starter, and it would be awesome. It would be a very strong starter. So that one there is 2 years old and he works fantastic. He fluffs up. Soon I fed him this morning at 7, and by 10 o'clock he was ready to go. So, and sometimes it can take up to 10 or 12 hours before they fluff right up. So when you mix this starter with flour and water and salt, you will get a risen loaf of bread. Now, I just wanted to touch briefly on the history of sourdough because some people don't understand just how old it is and why it's so kind of fascinating. So the oldest sourdough that I could find there's evidence in Switzerland. They've done an archaeological dig and found it dating back as early as 3,700 BC. So for the history buffs out there, fucking long time ago. And that was this proof of baked sourdough bread at that point. It's one of the oldest forms of leavened bread, so bread that has yeast and rises, not flatbreads. Flatbreads go back further than that. Now, in ancient Egypt, around 1500 BC, workers on the pyramid are recorded as having been sustained by sourdough bread as a staple of their diet. So people started to realise that this was a convenient food, and that's what it is. I mean, when you take away meat and vegetables and plants and nuts and berries and dairy, which have been huge parts of the human diet for thousands and thousands of years, when you take away those, a lot of those aren't always transportable. And we've talked about it before when I discussed milk and raw milk. The Chinese Mongols would carry mare's milk in a leather satchel on their saddle packs, and all the riding and the heat and everything would turn it into yogurt, which made it have a much longer shelf life than what milk would have. Well, bread was the same. Bread was a way of turning a plant into something that had a much longer shelf life and that could be transported and carried and eaten as is, rather than having to cook, prepare, process it. You didn't need a fire for it. You could sit and eat it cold. You could eat it with something. Sourdough's absolutely lovely with oil and vinegar, but because I don't tend to eat seed oils anymore, if I'm going to have it, I just have it with a big slab of butter, because to me, that's the nicest way to have it. But the process of it, the process of making sourdough has been around for so long because people realised it was a very transportable and beneficial food source. Now, that having been said, I know I do rabbit on about carnivore a lot, but not everybody is going to eat a carnivore diet. And, I've said my reasons for not sticking to it 100% of the time. I like my food. I like bread. I like the taste of it. So I think people found it a very convenient method of food. Now, if you fast forward into the 19th century, so going through from history, and I do love my history, going through from history, around the 15th century, a different form of yeast was developed, and that was barm, I think it's called. I don't have all the details on it, but it started replacing sourdough to a degree, and it was a form of yeast that was concentrated and kept separate and added to bread. So instead of sourdough, they would use it as a separate kind of yeast format. Then people also developed baker's yeast, and that was in the mid 1800s. Louis Pasteur, I want to say, I could be wrong, don't shoot me down if I'm wrong on that one, found and processed commercial baker's yeast. And because of that, it made it easier for people to make commercial loaves of bread without the process of sourdough. Sourdough is not a quick process. It is something that needs to be planned out, mapped out. You need timings, things like that. So having baker's yeast that you could just quickly add to a mix and cook straight away made it simpler for people to feed the masses. And it seems like every time we've gone to one of these food changeovers where we've wanted to feed the masses quicker, we've kind of wrecked the food that we had in the first place. I want to say that. And I know that sounds like, living in the dark ages, but it does seem like that. It seems like every time we change a food to make it better and feed the masses, we fuck it up. I mean, raw milk was changed to pasteurised because, hey, I just realised Louis Pasteur is the person responsible for both of those things. I'll just leave that there. Anyway, in the 19th century, in the California gold rush, miners carried sourdough starters with them to make bread on the road when they were out mining and living in camps. And these starters were so important to them that there's documented evidence of them sleeping with them in their bed in order to keep the temperature right so that they didn't go bad. Just want to put that one out there too. So I'll just go through and make sure I've got everything there. Oh, one thing I was going to say to you was, and I'll put the links in the show notes, look up Carl Griffith's 1847 starter. So starter once you have a mother starter I keep saying mother starter, I'll just say mother, it makes it easier. Once you've got a mother going, you can keep that mother going indefinitely. Like, you just feed it when you want to, that's why I say I shouldn't have thrown out my one, 4 years ago. You can keep that mother going by feeding it on regular intervals. And you know what? You can treat them mean and keep them keen. I have had a mother sit in the fridge for 2 months, and when I pulled it out, it was acidy. It smelled like nail polish remover. I pulled it out. I drained the blacky liquid off, which was pretty vile. I cut it in half. I refed it. I cut it in half again 12 hours later, refed it again. Cut it in half another 12 hours later, refed it again. That is the basis of Harry. So Harry comes from that particular batch and works fine. So you can treat them really mean and still bring them back. So Carl Griffith has got a starter that started in 1847 and has been handed down through his family. He's from the USA. That starter's been handed down through his family for years. And they've done studies on it. There's traces of grape skin in it, which grape skin is a lactic acid. So it's something that they did used to use for getting mothers to really come alive again. But you can apply to a web page and get a sample of dried mother from Carl Griffith's 1847 starter. I don't know whether it costs. I haven't gone in and had a look. But if you really if you get right into it, that might be something that you would like to do. And I think the main reason that sourdough made a bit of a reoccurrence, a bit more of a comeback, is that people were getting back to that more natural diet. We want to eat more ancestrally. And knowing that sourdough was the traditional bread and it was the bread that we had before we had all the preservatives and all the rest of it, plus sourdough tastes amazing. So anybody that says they've had sourdough and they don't like it, you probably haven't had proper sourdough. If you've had proper sourdough, you would always want to have proper sourdough. The commercially made sourdough does not really taste like sourdough to me. It's got a lot of tang to it, but the bread just doesn't have the same texture or smell or anything like that. And honestly, if you go to the shops, if you think, oh no, what I'm buying is definitely sourdough, I dare you to go to the shop, turn the bag over, or if you've got it in your cupboard at home now, go and get it, turn the bag over and have a look. If there is anything other than flour, salt, and water listed as the ingredients, what you've got is not sourdough. So that's why you probably should have a crack at doing sourdough. And it's not that hard. That's the thing. I joke and refer to it as my science experiment. It really isn't that hard. It is something that you can make a loaf of bread very, very cheaply. You think about it. What would be the cost for 10 grams of salt and 500 grams of flour? Because essentially that's what you can make a loaf of bread with. And you don't have any of the chemical additives, colours, flavours, preservatives, anything like that. Now, it doesn't last. They say that sourdough was originally developed to make the bread last longer. It does last as far as bread goes, but as far as commercially made bread, no. They have shelf extenders added to them so that in 6 days' time, you can still get a slice of bread out and it doesn't feel stale. Anybody like me, Gen Xers that grew up, in the 70s and 80s, you'll remember that breads back then used to go stale really quick. Like, mum would buy a loaf of bread every second day. If we had to eat day-old bread, we were complaining because it felt stale. Now, I'd buy a loaf of bread for my kids, commercial loaf, and it could last like 5 or 6 days and it still feels fresh. And I kind of get a bit edgy around that because I'm like, what is in that to make it last that long? It doesn't seem right. Why would fresh food last that long? So, yeah. I've got an interesting story that I probably shouldn't share, but from my days as a police officer, I may have gone to a crime scene that had been locked for 6 months and found KFC. I don't want to say it. The chicken place. I might delete that out and just say the chicken place that sells fried chicken. Found a tub of it, and 6 months after the crime scene had been locked up, there was fried chicken still intact and looked just like fried chicken that you would buy, that day, because there's so many preservatives in what they cook it in that it kept it completely intact, and ants and flies didn't want it. Think about that. Ants and flies didn't want it. If they don't want it, that should say something. So why should you be looking at sourdough? Amongst all the millions of other things that you've got on your plate that you probably don't need to add another thing to, making bread is a really simple, easy food source for your family. And it's something that you can do, like I say, very cheap, 500 grams. I'll try and put in the show notes, I'll try and work out the costings. I buy my flour in bulk. I buy baker's flour and I buy it in bulk from Costco. So it's a 25 kilo bag. And I think it cost me, I want to say it cost me $24 Australian. So that would be like $14 US for 25 kilos. Half a kilo of flour makes a loaf of bread. So $1, no, less. I'm trying to work that out. Yeah, $1. So I know 50 cents. So 50 cents for a loaf to make a loaf of bread. Now, if that's not going to help you ditch the store, I don't know what is, because 50 cents a loaf, at the moment, the cheap, nasty, really gross, bread that doesn't taste very good, I can't get that in Australia under $3.30 for a loaf of bread. Depending on where you live, obviously, some people have it dear or better. But sourdough, if you want to buy a proper loaf of sourdough from the bakers, you're looking at $8, $9, $10, sometimes $12, $13 for a loaf of sourdough. Now, if you can make that for 50 cents, God, you can make it and sell it to your neighbours. So All you need is flour, salt and water and your mother dough starter. And the mother dough starter, I used to make massive mountains of it. You don't need heaps. You just need, literally, you can make mother dough starter with a tablespoon of somebody else's mother dough starter. So mother dough, oh God, I'm really off with the fairies today. Mother, a tablespoon of mother is enough to start off another batch. And I'm actually making up some batches at the moment because I want to give some out to people. So for anybody that's listening, if you are in or around the Canberra area and you want some of Harry, you want a piece of Harry, my fluffy mother, let me know. Send me a DM and I will get you 100 grams of mother that is 2 years old, very active, and you can start your own sourdough process without having to wait a week to get everything active, because it takes about a week for your mother to really liven up and get active enough to use. So why do you need to do it? A couple of reasons. It's a great observation skill. Agriculture, farming, homesteading is a science skill. It's learning to observe what you've got in front of you, what's working, what isn't, tweaking, redoing it, reassessing, starting again. I have a book, The Sourdough Trials. I'm trying to get that not in the light. Sourdough Trials. I keep a list of, that's today's one, a list of what I'm doing. For those that are listening, I was just showing a little book I've got, which I just keep notes about what I try and what works. Because one of the things with sourdough is you will have trial and error, and you will have a lot of errors in the first place. I think some of the breads, I've got here a little note about my miserable failures. The handy helper and the kids have had to sit through some pretty appalling failed loaves that none of us could eat. They were rock hard. Even the chooks would turn their nose up at them. But when I get it right, when I get a loaf that comes out and it's beautiful, they rave about it for weeks. And literally, I have had OJ come in and go, oh, Mum, you have to make that bread again, the one that you made the other week, that you just make it exactly like that. That was perfect. And I have to try and explain to him that every time you make a loaf, there might be little tweaks or little changes, or the weather could change. Yeah, it is trial and error, and do not give up after a couple of failed attempts, because I have had so many failed attempts, but the good ones outweigh the bad, and you get better every single time you do it. I'm so consistent now. I can't remember the last really badly failed loaf, but I'm much more consistent now with my good loaves than I am with my bad. But it's taken me a couple of years to get there. So, and that's not consistent years. So if you're doing it consistently, within 6 months, you should be consistently turning out a loaf that is, your family are going, wow, this is awesome. Thanks so much. I also think it connects you to your food a little bit better. You know, making things from scratch. We don't do it as much as we used to, but honestly, it's so much nicer that, look, even your worst sourdough loaf is going to be better than commercially bought bread. It's going to taste better and better for you. So at the end of the day, even a bad loaf at home is still going to be better than a good loaf from the store. And also to get your kids involved. My kids love doing the sourdough thing. They love making it. They love feeding Harry and watching him coming back an hour later and seeing him almost bubbling over the top. They really enjoy that process. So especially little kids, now they're a bit older, all they want is the finished product. But when they were little, when I first started doing it, they used to love it. To them, it was a homemade science experiment. Now, all the rules that I'm going to give you over the next 8 weeks apply whether you are in the US, Canada, Germany. There's a great guy I follow in Germany. So if you're in Germany, go check out YouTube. There's a guy that I follow over there who's an awesome baker. And, I am not a baker. I can cook, and I'm very keen to learn, but I'm not a baker and I'm not a dietitian. So everything that I've picked up through trial and error, through reading, through educating myself on sourdough. So I would encourage you to not just listen to me about sourdough, go and find other people as well. There are some people whose recipes, I've tried a proper auto-lease recipe where you mix the water and the flour and then mix your sourdough and your salt, your mother and your salt after. It was okay, but honestly, I don't have time for that shit. So I do the bulk mix where the salt and the mother go into the flour and water all in one go. And I found that just works for me as far as time-wise. And that's what you have to do, is go through, take the best bits out of everybody that's giving you information about sourdough, but then work out what's going to work for your family. And it is trial and error as far as timings, when to feed your mother to make sure that it's nice and bubbly and active, when to then do your first mix, when to do your stretch and folds, which we'll discuss over the coming weeks, when to do your bulk fermentation, your bulk rise, when to do your final shaping, when to proof it. Your system, that's why you need to keep a book where you write everything down, because your system will be different depending on your weather, your climate, the flour that you're using. The flour that I use, the baker's flour, is very absorbent. So sometimes I find that I have to add a little bit more water to it in order to make sure that there's enough hydration. But then I've gone overboard and added too much water and overhydrated and ended up with a bit of a flat loaf. So you do have to tweak. And that's why it's better. It's like a science experiment. You have to write down what you're doing so you can go back and say, I'm not going to do that again. So get the kids involved in the science experiment. They will love it. Sorry, I just had to pause there for a bit of a coughing episode, so nobody wanted to hear that. Now, as I said, I'm no dietitian and I'm no baker. I'm just somebody who likes the idea of not having to buy things from the store and being able to make things from scratch myself and being able to do it as cheaply as possible. I don't want to spend more money than I have to get the food that's nutritious for my family. I want to be able to do it as cheaply as possible. So I went and had a little bit of a look to see why it is that sourdough doesn't impact me on my gut as much. And I've heard other people say it too. So it was interesting to do a little bit of research on that, because I thought, I think I know why, but let's just have a look. So I've got a couple of things here. One of the things I wanted to point out is that sourdough, the system of making sourdough bread, improves digestibility. So the natural fermentation process that it goes through with the mother, and then because it's such a long proofing system, it's 24 hours to make a loaf of bread. That process breaks down the gluten proteins into smaller peptides. Now, this is the research I've done, so don't quiz me on this later. And those breaking that gluten down makes it easier for people like me who are a little bit gluten sensitive to digest it without having an upset stomach. As I said at the beginning, I tried to get some solid research on this, and everything says, oh no, there's nothing that's been proven. But there's a lot of people that have that anecdotal evidence to say, when I have sourdough bread, I don't get upset stomachs. It doesn't affect me in the same way that normal bread does. Now, one of the other things is because of that fermentation process again, because fermented foods, and I should do an article on fermented foods, because fermented foods are really good for your gut health. The fermentation process of the bread and flour and yeast, or what the breaking down of the flour to make it into yeast, it reduces the fructan content. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So anybody that's been on a reduced FODMAPs diet, so the reduced sugars in your diet that sometimes can cause people to have autoimmune issues and gut health issues, if you're on a FODMAPs diet, then that fermentation process in the sourdough can make sourdough bread suitable for people on a low FODMAPs diet, because it breaks down the sugars further than what they would normally be broken down in commercial bread. And so they don't get the sensitivity and the stomach upsets as a result. Now, some people say that there is an enhanced nutrition, I want to say absorption. I'm still getting my breath back, folks. That process improves the mineral bioavailability for people. When they're eating the bread, they get more nutrients out of the bread. Now, that having been said, some people say, well, there's not that much nutrient in flour anyway. Depends what flour you use. And like I say, I'm using just normal baker's flour, so it's white processed, ultra processed flour. But if you go right into sourdough, there's so many different flours you could be using. Particularly in Europe, they use a lot of rye bread flours, whole wheat flours, and the whole wheat flours can make a really different kind of mother too. They can make it a much stronger, a much more robust kind of mother. So you can use different flours, and there's lots of ways you can go with that. And we will have an episode talking about the different flours you can use, because there is a lot of difference. And the last one is the lower glycemic index. So for people that are on a sugar insulin diet, where they have to really monitor how much sugars are going into their system, sourdough bread has a lower glycemic index than normal commercial bread. So that makes it, again, a little bit simpler for people to digest and absorb without getting that sugar rush, getting that high sugar after it. And they used to say, oh, have brown bread, that's better for you. not the modern brown bread. The modern brown bread is just commercial brown bread as well. So if you are really trying to get to that low glycemic index, we'll discuss it in further episodes when we talk about the different flours. But there are some flours that are better than others. Not all flours are created equal. Might have to call that episode Animal Farm, might know. All flours are equal, but some are more equal than others. Anyway, it's important to note, and I did say at the beginning, that if you are a celiac, then you need to follow medical advice, because celiac is completely different to gluten sensitivity in that a celiac is allergic to wheat. That's my understanding of it. Shoot me down in flames, but they are actually allergic to wheat, and consuming wheat can be detrimental for them and can cause huge health implications because it is a proper allergy. If you are gluten sensitive or gluten intolerant, then sourdough might be something that you can look into. And again, with anything like this, trial and error, test it on a day that is not going to matter to you. I know when I was at my worst with my gluten sensitivity, if I had bread or anything, wheat products, pasta, anything like that, I would be out of action for about 6 hours. Like, I really could not leave the house, and too much information, I know, but you are literally running to the bathroom for the next 6 hours. So if that's the kind of reaction you get, if you get that really strong gut reaction from having normal commercial wheat products, then I would say trial and error sourdough, proper homemade sourdough. And if you want to trial it without going through the process of making it a home for yourself, go to a baker, like a proper baker, and say, I want to try some sourdough, but I want to know that what I'm getting is true sourdough. It's actually just flour, water, and salt. And they'll tell you if they have additives in it. Most of them don't. Most of the traditional bakers, if they're marketing it as sourdough, it is sourdough. But just double check with them, make sure there's nothing else in it. And then try that, but try it on a day where it's not going to matter, where if the day becomes a write-off and you are stuck to the toilet, then yeah. And obviously, if that's the case, I would say, sorry, had to stop mid-cough. I would say maybe go back to your doctor and speak to them about the possibility that you are celiac and not just gluten sensitive. Because if sourdough is still impacting you, then it may be that it's more than just a gluten sensitivity. And it really isn't that hard these days to do a celiac test. I've had a celiac test done. I am not celiac. The doctor suggested that because I was reacting so badly to pasta and bread and things like that. And he said straight up, you are just a true gluten sensitive. That being said, I can eat sourdough without a stomach upset, so that just goes to show you there's something in that. But if you are a celiac, there are versions of bread that you can make not using wheat. And I may have to do a little episode on that just to kind of say to people, hey, if you can't have wheat products, there are options for making a pseudo sourdough bread that would be suitable for people for celiacs as well. I'll try and do that, so you don't miss out. Nobody needs to miss out on sourdough. So let me know. I want you to send me a DM. That's everything I needed to talk about. If you think that sourdough is going to be too hard for you, send me a DM and tell me what it is that you think you're going to struggle with sourdough. Is it, looking after your mother? Like I said, treat them mean, keep them keen. Mine just keeps coming back. Is it that you are not a baker and you're a bit nervous about actually baking, going through that process? Are you worried about wasting flour? Because believe me, 50 cents worth of flour, like I say, you waste a couple, but when you get the good ones, oh my God, they're worth their weight in gold. Are you interested in doing it? Maybe, like baking a couple of loaves of bread. I don't have a big enough oven because we're off grid. We have a very small oven. I don't have a big enough oven, but I would love to make sourdough and sell it to people. Honestly, I keep saying to the handy helper, next thing on the list is a pizza oven, a wood-fired pizza oven out in the yard. And then once a week, I could fire up the wood-fired pizza oven and cook like 7 or 8 loaves at the same time and sell them to my customers that buy eggs off me. I would love to do that. Now, as I said, halfway through, if you are interested in getting some of Harry, if you want to get your hands on Harry, the fluffy sourdough, and you live near Canberra, so within Murrum Bateman, Gundaroo, Canberra area, let me know. I am more than happy to get to you 100 grams of Harry so that you can have a crack at starting your own mother process going so that you can make your own sourdough. I would like to do that as a gift for you. I am looking down the track to sell them, but if you're listening to the podcast, I would be more than happy to hand over 100 grams and say, here, have a crack at making it and see how you go. Now, also too, I never ask for reviews, but if you are listening and, apologies for not getting this out on Monday, I would not have been able to talk for 40 minutes on Monday because I couldn't even get a breath in on Monday. I was very much loaded up with steroids and I'm still coming off them now. But if you get the chance to leave a review, please do. The reviews bump my podcast up the list so that other people get shown mine as an option to listen to. And without those reviews, people just don't hear about me. They don't get to see what we're doing. I can't include them in sending things out to them. If you are not already doing it, you can go to mojohomestead.net/7must-knows. I think it's still under 7 must knows. And you can get a free backyard chicken keeping guide. And that gets you onto my newsletter list. So then you'll hear first when other things are coming out, because there are a whole bunch of things coming out the next couple of weeks. So make sure you're on that list if you're not already on there. I've just wiped out some of my list. There were people who were just they weren't engaging. They weren't, they kind of weren't getting the newsletters and opening them. So I got them off the list. I don't want you on the list if you're not interested in what I'm putting out there. But if you are interested, I'm happy to send you anything that I've got. So jump on that list if you need to. And if you know anybody who you think is at a point, especially, I'm not going to get political. I'm not going to talk about the election we've just had in Australia. But the cost of living in Australia is driving everybody insane. We're all struggling. I don't think even people on a really good income are still struggling. Mortgages still go up. Car payments still go up. Electricity bills still go up. So if you are in a situation where you are trying to ditch the store, or you know somebody else who is also trying to do that, point them in the direction of the podcast, because everybody needs to hear what we're doing. Everybody needs to get on board with this. Nobody has to pay supermarket prices for things that you can make for yourself at home, and they're not even that hard to do. I really want to get that kind of message out to people. Anyway, that's it for me this week. If you're not, I'll put a quick clip up for those that are on YouTube. We're on baby watch here. Oh, it's the big baby watch. Molly and Millie, our two potty calves. Millie didn't get pregnant this year because the poor old belted Galway from next door couldn't get up over her. She's a Frisian and she's too tall. I'll show you a photo of her. Molly, who is half Frisian, half Black Angus, is a bit shorter, and the belted Galway was able to impregnate her 10 months ago. We are now on baby watch, and it won't be long. She has got a full udder. She has been losing mucus plug for the last 3 weeks, which it can be up to 4 weeks of losing mucus plug. The baby can be felt kicking, and I can feel what I'm hoping is a backside and back legs kicking. And she's very, very big and starting to walk with that real strained walk. Her ligaments have started to go in her tail. We're kind of waiting with bated breath for this baby to arrive. So if you are not following me on Mojo Homestead at Instagram, TikTok or Facebook, go follow. It'll also be on YouTube for my YouTube watchers. On the shorts, I have been posting to let you know up-to-date news on how she's going on baby watch. But make sure you're following so that you get the news when Molly's baby arrives. And we're trying to think of a name. So if you can think of a name, I want a name that starts with N, because we've got Millie and Molly. And so I'll go to the next letter of the alphabet, which is an N name. If it's a boy, I hate to break it to you, it's going to freezer camp. It's going to be called T-Bone. OJ's already named it. If it's a girl, though, I want an old-fashioned N-sounding name. The only name it can't be is Nora. We have a Nora in the family. We can't have another Nora. But any other N name, send me a DM and tell me what your name is for the baby, and we'll go from there. Anyway, that's it for me for today. I've made it through with only 2 or 3 stops for coughing. By next week, I'm hoping I will be much, much better, and I'll speak to you all then. Bye for now. Well, that's it for today's episode of Ditch the Store. If you're loving the journey to self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review for us or share this episode with a friend who's ready to break up with their supermarket. If you've got questions or success stories, we'd love to hear about them on the socials. You can also find me at www.mojohomestead.net. Until next time, keep raising, growing and making. And remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.